we create our own meaning and value. So what is important to you is something that you literally just made up, right? Or like when we decide like, oh, the ideal body is this body shape. We literally just make that up. So if you decide what your value and your meaning is, you can change that when you want, right? So you can stop using that as like a way of punishing yourself and just go, oh, I just change it. Hello and welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, episode number 97. It's the first podcast episode of 2023, and I hope your year has started off with a great start, and I hope you are having a wonderful week and setting the pace for 2023. I was reflecting on the fact that like 3 years ago at this time, we had no idea what was happening in the world and what would happen within weeks and how much things have changed since the beginning of the pandemic. And yeah, it's just been wild. Like 3 years felt like it lasted forever, but it also felt like it went by really, really fast. And so as I was thinking about this episode, which I had planned out way before the new year, I wanted to kind of talk about like setting goals and implementing goals and all that goes around with it, because naturally it's the first week of the year. It's what represents a fresh start for so many of us. And I actually love the idea of like the new year and a fresh start. Also, this is a year I turned 40. And so I'm so excited. I feel like it's such a big milestone. Super, super stoked. And I have great goals. And yeah, I was just thinking about how I want to accomplish those goals and what I can share with you. And so this episode will be kind of, different. It's not in terms of like, how to show up in relationships and how that's going, but it may give you some ideas of how you want to set your goals for this year, for your life, really. Hey, Mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. When I think about setting goals, I think, especially having come from academia, every year in my old job, we had to like set our annual goals, and they were like development goals. And then there were like the goals that aligned with the institution's goals, which usually were strategic planning goals. And there would naturally be like personal goals, like where do I want to see myself a year from now or 5 years from now? What I did notice was that even though a lot of personal growth was happening in it, there wasn't really a focus on like, this is how I want to change, or this is how I want to show up in my relationships. One of the downsides to that is that when you approach your goals from action, you really don't change the foundation of what really needs to change in order for you to see meaningful change, which is really changing your thoughts and changing your feelings so that you can take actions from those empowered emotions that will keep you going forward. I was thinking in terms of motivation, being excited about your goals, how fleeting that can be. Like when you make plans, especially those of us that make New Year's resolutions, they come from a place of real like motivation, and your prefrontal cortex is fully engaged and like ready to go. But if you don't actually have the motivation like long term, then those goals kind of get dropped to the wayside. As I think about things that I want to accomplish and the things that our family wants to accomplish as a unit, I always think about like, what do we want to feel in order to do that? And so first, like when we think about setting goals, obviously there are different categories of goals. In this episode, I'm just going to talk about like different ones in terms of personal goals, career goals, your health goals, your financial goals. But really under personal goals, I was thinking about your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your partner, and then your relationship with your children. So your parenting goals, and then maybe your relationship with your family of origin or extended family, and then your friendship goals, your relationship goals as far as your friendship. While this is like super important, all these other relationships, I think the first thing to really have that like mindset shift is your relationship with yourself. What I want to offer you for my relationship goals with myself this year, I want to continue to practice more self-compassion. I want to continue to practice more self-awareness and to celebrate myself more this year. Especially, like I said, it's a big year for me. It's a milestone birthday. So I want to celebrate, being here for 40 years. I want to celebrate, being a wife and being a mom and being a coach and being a nurse anesthetist. And I want to celebrate all those facets of myself from a place of just like self-love and self-awareness and like deep respect for myself. As I was looking at the goals that I want to achieve this year, I thought a lot about how my relationship with myself has evolved, especially over the last 3 years, and how that has actually then showed up in my relationships with my husband, my daughter, my friendships, my workplace relationships, how that's continuing to evolve. And I'm in awe of like looking back, how that change seems like such a big change, even though in the day-to-day it just seemed like little steps. I was recently reading a book by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, which I will, quote a few times in this episode, and it's called The Gap in the Gain. And one of the things that stood out for me in that book that I want to take with me into 2023 is in The Gap in the Gain, they really talk about like when you look at like where you are now and where you want to go, and you assume that happiness is in the future, you kind of stay in a gap, right? You're always feeling like there's a gap that needs to be filled. When you perceive your present self as the happiness you want to feel and where you are going isn't a destination, but a continuation of that happiness, then you stay in the game. And so happiness isn't out there. Happiness isn't tomorrow or in the future. Happiness is in the now, and what's working in the now, and what's not working in the now is like really where our happiness is. And so my relationship with myself, as it continues to evolve, I also choose to see the things that I just love about myself. And then the things that I could improve on are just like extra. Like they're things that, I will continue to always work on. And I respect that. I respect that of myself, and I respect that of who I am. I want to offer you, when you're thinking about your personal goals as far as your relationship with yourself, really just ask yourself, like, how do I want to feel about myself on a day-to-day basis? What are the thoughts that I want to think about myself every single day? Like, what do I think of me? So I want to think of myself as somebody who gives everything a valiant effort and who is continuously committed to improving myself, improving the lives of those around me, and improving the lives of others. And so when I think of myself that way, I feel the emotion of courage, and I also feel compelled. And courage for me means that I dare greatly. I get in the arena, I get my butt kicked in the arena, and I'm okay with that. It also gives me the courage to fail when I do make mistakes, when I may inadvertently or sometimes, not really on purpose, but cause other people pain and hurt. And being willing to know that, like, even though I may have had a failure, I am not a failure. I am a human being and not a human doer or a human giver. That's the first goal that I think of as far as relationships. And then my marriage relationships. Not relationships. I only have one marriage. For me, the goal for my marriage this year is to really work on just fostering the communication between my husband and I and communicating our needs. And it was interesting because today I was on Instagram, and the Gottman Institute had published this post that was just like spoke to me. What the post was talking about is turn your relationship goals into habits. Sometimes I get on consults, I will have the future client say to me, I want to communicate better with my partner. And it sounds like it's a great concept and it's a great goal. And then I say, what would that look like? And sometimes the people who I'm talking to in the consult, they're like, oh, I actually don't know. It's a lofty goal, but we don't really know what habits would need to be in it. And really, sometimes what they're saying is, I want my partner to hear me. But that also involves, like, how am I bidding for connection? For me, what I want to work on this year, as far as my relationship with my husband, is really paying attention to how he bids to connect with me and reciprocating those bids, speaking up and communicating the mental load of motherhood with my partner without expecting him to take a load from me, but to just be heard and to just like for him to understand how I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing, to be validated. In this post by the Gottman Institute that was talking about turning your relationship into goals, some of the examples they offered, for example, if your goal is to strengthen trust in your marriage, then you would have to create a habit, right? You would have to create a habit in order for that goal to be met. So it could be creating the habit of talking openly about your needs and your desires to your partner. What they talk about is the value of intimate conversation in building emotional connection, leading to more trust in your relationship and position in your lovemaking. If your goal is to increase intimacy, then a habit to create is to pay more attention to your partner's bids for emotional connection. So when you respond to your partner's bids, if they're big or if they're small, you show them that you're there to support them when they need it the most, which only fosters your connection. Let's say you're in the habit, you're in, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is contempt, and you're noticing that you're becoming more contemptuous in your marriage. One of the habits you can start to practice is how to nurture the fondness and admiration in your relationship. How are you connecting with your partner? So we know the value of fondness and admiration in the health of a long-term relationship. To prevent contempt from becoming an overwhelming presence in your life, one, you have to start practicing awareness and just kind of seeing, where am I being contemptuous? If your goal, another example that I was thinking of when I read that post, if your goal is to notice that you criticize your spouse more and maybe the goal is less criticism in your marriage, what are the habits that you would need to do? One of the tasks that I give my coaching clients is thank your partner for something every single day. And because your brain is always looking for the negative, when you force it to see the positive, then your perspective shifts. So that can be one habit that you can bring into your marriage to just like notice what's working. And if your goal is to connect deeper and show up more, as 100% of the highest version of yourself, it's going to have to be a habit that you can practice day in, day out. One of the things that I will tell you is that when we start off the new year, we have all these ideas and somehow along the way, they no longer become an idea. So for me, what I like to think about is habits and the value of habits in really fostering like what we want to achieve. And so when I read Atomic Habits, which is a book that I actually want to reread this year, James Clear, the author, introduced the concept of implementation intention, which is a plan you make ahead of time about when and where to act. So this is how you intend to implement a particular habit. So what he says is like most of us think that we lack motivation. What we really lack is clarity. It's not always obvious when and where to take action. So some of us just spend time waiting for the perfect moment to make an improvement. And the simple way to use this strategy in your habits is to just create this sentence in your brain or write it down. And it says, I will, and then what behavior at the time in location. So for example, maybe you want to start meditating or exercising. I'll use exercise because that's one of mine, right? You can just write down, I will exercise for 1 hour at 4 p.m. 3 days a week. Or let's say you have an intention to improve your relationship with your partner and maybe show more appreciation. It could be, I will make my partner a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock on Saturdays in the kitchen. And so then it becomes a habit, right? And it becomes a thing that you do to show your love and appreciation, and that builds on your fondness and admiration. So instead of like coming up with this giant goal of like, oh, I'm going to have better, communication in my marriage, or, my trust and our intimacy is going to grow, coming up with habits that would push you in the direction of achieving those goals. The other goal that I was thinking about as far as a relationship is motherhood or parenting goals, right? So let's say this year you have set the goal, I don't want to yell at my kids as much as I did last year. So when you think about like when you yell at your kids and the emotion that it creates, for most of my clients, one of the things that they say, it creates shame, it creates guilt, it creates frustration. One way you can kind of just create that habit as an intentional habit is to say, I will find something positive to see in them every day and I will say it out loud, or I will give my daughter or son a hug every morning. So creating that habit, which creates positive perspective before like kind of stacking those habits. Another one that you can think about is going back to the thoughts that you want to think about the person is setting an intention to notice your thoughts about your parenting or your marriage or your friendships, setting an intention to pay attention to when that goes off in the negative. So, for example, when you are maybe watching your kids and you're like, oh, I can't stand that they bicker all the time. When that is your focus, right? When you think about that and it creates frustration and anger for you, of course, the actions that you create, they're not going to yield habits that are going to foster that relationship. So maybe it can be, I am willing to feel the discomfort of my kids like not getting along so that they can practice like conflict resolution. And I can be the adult in the relationship who helps them to see where maybe that's not how you show up. Like, I'm not going to allow them to hit each other. I'm not going to allow them to scream and yell and, at night, but I'm going to help them foster their conflict resolution skills. So just paying attention to how you're viewing and the thoughts that you're thinking about that other person in the relationship may help you see what needs to change. So one of the things for me in 2022 was just being aware of my intentions in relationships, especially friendships, how I was showing up in those friendships. Was it reciprocal? Was it in kindness? Was it that I was having positive thoughts about the person? Or was I thinking, oh, I'm so much better than this person, or this person is not as good as I am? And when I did that, some of those relationships I realized we weren't aligning. And it was okay because I also wasn't thinking thoughts that were yielding the relationship building emotions such as trust and compassion and curiosity. Instead, it was probably yielding emotions that I didn't feel like would build out. It could be envy. It could be distrust. It could be, jealousy. Like just noticing the thoughts that you have about the other person and setting those relationship goals to yield that. So I want to touch a little bit on like health and career goals. Again, just thinking about like, what do you want to think about your health? And what emotions do you want to feel when you're healthy? So what would you feel if you, for example, got to your weight loss goal? Would you feel confident? And being aware of that you can feel confident now and you can feel all confident all the way to the health goal. But what is the thought that you're healthy going to create a feeling of? So for me, when I think about being healthy, I talk to my daughter all the time. As I only have one child, right? I think about wanting to be around when my daughter has children and becoming a grandmother. And in order for me to do that, I have to take better care of myself, right? So barring like, accidents or any other thing happening, what can I control for to see me to that result of like seeing my daughter walk down the aisle, holding my first grandchild? Like, how would I get there? What would I feel? And then using that emotion of feeling compelled to see myself through the goal in order to take better care of myself. When it comes to financial goals, like what is the thought that you want to think about your finances that's going to get you to making better decisions? So one of the things for me was that because of my family doesn't have generational wealth built up, but it was something that is important for me for my descendants. And so I want to create wealth in the world so that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren and future generations don't have to struggle like I did, right? Even though that struggle got me to a lot of things, I don't want that for my future, right? I don't want that for the generations that come after me. When I think about my legacy and like my career goals as a coach, I have this intention to change the lives of many women. And so for me, the emotion that will create is fulfillment. And I can feel fulfilled now with the number of women I've coached and I continue to coach. and keep pushing towards that goal of creating a bigger result in the world. So just something to think about. And in terms of like thinking about your relationships and how that was like, how would that push you forward? So although the topic today is really like all sorts of goals, I wanted to highlight more relationship goals. So like relationship with yourself, relationship with your partner, your parenting relationships and your friendships and your family relationships. One of the things that I spent a lot of time working on in the fall was I have this like fantastical idea of what like Christmas time should look like. And my husband challenged me and offered me that, it's our turn now to create traditions for our nuclear family, our little family, instead of me always feeling the like resistance when I want to make a plan with our extended families and it's just not working out and I feel frustrated. And he's like, what if we just make the plans that we can control for, which is our family? And so I started looking at that in terms of like the goals that I set and how we show up in our relationship and how we like foster, other relationships for our marriage and our families around us, like prioritizing that. So when you're thinking about your goals and the relationship goals that you have, another thing that is so important for you to check is how do those goals actually align with your core values, right? If your core value is connection and balance, how is that reflecting in the goals that you're setting? If you want connection, are you choosing work and hustle over family time? Are you prioritizing spending time with your family? And that's something for me that I've spent time working on because when I was, like my husband would want to do Sunday activities, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. And so then I started realizing, well, why is that coming, the work that I'm doing during the week coming at the expense of me having a family day? And so prioritizing that and not doing it from a way of shaming myself, just like, how does this align to my core values and what can I do to improve that? So the other thing that I've been thinking about for myself and my goals for this year is the goals that I want to have as a parent and what do I want to do to improve myself and how would that like move forward in my relationship with my parent. And I was thinking about just like the concept of like parenting from a different perspective. And thankfully, I found this book. It's called The Parenting Revolution by Kiva Schuler. I will include it in the show notes. She is the founder of the J Parenting Institute. And she was just talking about how like we can't raise leaders in the world when we don't know how to honor our children and we don't have the knowledge that our children are the key to our future. And in order for us to raise happier humans with the courage and self-image to be risk takers, change makers, and creators, we need to redefine our roles as parents. So that's another goal for me is just to see how I'm parenting and decide what I want to take away from traditional parenting and what I want to leave behind. So she continues and talks about how traditional parenting suggests that most young people that in some greater scheme of things, their feelings don't matter, they should play it safe, and that many of their dreams are invalid or impractical. And so one of my parenting goals this year is to really foster that, like my daughter knowing that her dreams matter, that, that her future is important, and to honor her by working to become the parents who can help her realize her greatest, happiest potential. So that for me is a goal in terms of the work that I'm doing in my own parenting, but also it's something that I want to hone that skill so that when my coaching clients want more support with their parenting journey, I've walked that walk. I have walked that journey. And so I just kind of segued into that just to offer like the parenting relationship. It just, where you are in your life and what stage your kid is in, deciding if that's something that you want to really focus on. In terms of all the other goals, I think one of the things that I feel that is important to talk about is your future self. And I forget which of the two books, because I read like 2 books by Benjamin Hardy this past week. But in one of the books, he talks about like just focusing on, actually, the book is called Becoming Your Future Self. And I'll link it in the show notes if I get the exact name of the book, because I might be forgetting. But he talks about like your future self focus. And what we forget is like when we look at ourselves, like right now, it seems like we haven't made much progress. And so if you can just kind of go back a year at a time to 10 years ago, you can see how that version of you has evolved and the possibility of the future version that you want to become. So knowing, like, because it takes a growth mindset to realize that you don't have to be in the same place in December of 2023 as you were in December of 2022. What is that future self looking like? And so he talks about creating success criteria and being specific. So not saying, I want to build wealth, or I want to be happier, or I want to have, I want to have better communication. Like, what is that actually going to look like? What are you and your husband saying to each other in the morning when you wake up? What is the conversation during the day? What are you guys doing together? What does your intimacy look like? What does your friendship look like? What does your appreciation of each other look like? So being very specific, because vagueness only generates vagueness. The other thing is, we don't spend time evaluating what's working. And I will tell you that one of the biggest things that I've implemented in my life over the last year, actually 2 years, is evaluating. So imagine you decide that you want to start working out every day. And then you're like, it doesn't work. But you never go back and like figure out like what actually worked. Because when we just throw that blanket statement like it didn't work, then you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But what if you evaluate it and it's like, okay, it didn't work out when I planned to work out at 5 a.m. because I like didn't wake up and I turned off the alarm or I snoozed it. But the days that I worked out at 2 p.m., that worked out better. So having that like evaluation, and I like to do it like a weekly evaluation of like the things that I'm specific about, and you can decide to make it like a monthly evaluation, evaluates what's working and always start with what worked well. Then the second thing you evaluate is what didn't work well. If you didn't set the alarm, if you didn't maybe prepare the plan for the workout you were going to do. I'm guilty of this. I woke up, I went to the garage and I looked around at the equipment and I'm like, I don't feel like working out. And I went upstairs and took a shower, right? So what didn't work out? And then deciding, what do I want to do differently? When we never evaluate our goals, we always just say, yeah, I tried this thing, it didn't work. I now have some people tell me that. They were like, well, I tried like, positive perspective with my husband and it didn't work. And I'm like, okay, what did you do? And they're like, well, I did this one thing and then I didn't get the reception that I thought I would get. So I stopped doing it. I'm like, well, we never evaluated if it worked. So be willing to evaluate and always start out with what's working and then what didn't work and then deciding what you want to do differently. Otherwise, it's what Einstein described as insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is 5 concepts that I learned from the gap and the gain that I wanted to share with you that will help you when you are setting up these relationship goals and really any goals that you may set up for this year. And the first one is appreciate progress. So in my coaching program, one of the things that we start off our calls with is celebrating something. And sometimes my clients will say, I want to celebrate that I didn't yell at my kids today. And to some people, that might not sound like a lot, but I always want them to just see the progress that they're making. And when you notice the progress that you're making, you always stay in the gain. You always stay in the gain. And I remember in The Gap and the Gain, Benjamin Hardy talks about the statement, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What if we just called it the continuation of happiness? So it's not a destination. We're in it. We're just extending it and increasing it. So when we appreciate progress, we can always know that we're happy in the now and we will continue to be happy. The second thing is to use your ideals as inspiration and not to judge yourself with them. So that can look like if you want the ideal relationship and you've envisioned it and you've decided what it looks like, when it doesn't look exactly like that, don't discount the progress that you've made. Use that as inspiration. Don't use that as your yardstick. This one is important to point out because what some of us do is we go on social media and we see how other people are living their lives and we use that to compare ourselves. And we could literally take the same things that we're seeing on social media and say, oh, this is the ideal relationship that I strive for, or this is how I want to look like, the body shape, the body size, whatever you want to look like, and then decide it's just inspiration. I'm not going to look exactly like that. It's not going to be exactly like that, but this inspires me. Number 3 is, this is so important again, the celebration. each win is important. It doesn't matter if it's a small win or a big win. It's important. Like the fact that we celebrate our kids' wins when they play, softball, like, sports that are just like exciting for them, but they're not like, of course, they're not in the Olympics, but we celebrate that because each win matters. Why do we stop doing that as adults? Why do we discount our successes to only be the big things that are everybody can notice? So paying attention to that, like each win is important. Number 4, this is like, if you can take anything out of this podcast, I want this to be the thing. We create our own meaning and value. I'm going to repeat that again. We create our own meaning and value. So what is important to you is something that you literally just made up, right? Or like when we decide like, oh, the ideal body is, this body shape. We literally just make that up. So if you decide what your value and your meaning is, you can change that when you want, right? So you can stop using that as like a way of punishing yourself and just go, oh, I just change it. And this usually applies, like for me, what I always think about it is like when I set goals, for example, I'll just talk about like business goals. And I'm like, okay, this is a target revenue for my business. If I use that against myself, yet I'm the one that created it, I can literally be like, oh, yeah, I created that. It was an ideal, but it was just inspiration. It doesn't mean anything about me and my worthiness if I don't achieve the goal that I created, that I set up, that I decided was the target. I can just change that. So and I'm going to use weight loss because that's at the beginning of the year is a focus for many people. If you decided you wanted to lose 10 pounds and you lost 5, you just decide, I created that meaning and value and it's okay. Like it doesn't have to be a thing that you punish yourself over. Last but not least is appreciate everything in your world because happiness is in the now. It's not a destination. One of the things I loved that Benjamin Hardy talks about is the hedonistic treadmill. When you are chasing happiness, when you can't be happy in the now with what's working, you're always going to be on this treadmill where the next best thing is what you're chasing and you never get to it. And the idea of happiness being something we feel all the time, it's limiting because we cannot appreciate happiness if we never experience sadness because we would never know the difference. And every day can't be Christmas, for example. Every day can't be like the best, brightest day. And I remember my husband and my daughter and I were watching this. It's like an old Disney classic. Donald Duck's nephews were like, I wish it was Christmas every day. And they wish upon a star. And it's literally Christmas morning every day. And like after the 10th morning, they were like, make it stop. It can't be Christmas again. So it's okay that we have those highs and lows emotionally because that's how we're supposed to be. Life truly is 50-50. And so we can learn to appreciate the ups and the downs and be willing to feel other emotions that are not comfortable. What I want to offer you in conclusion for this episode is whatever your goals are for your relationships this year, first ask yourself, what is the emotion that you want to predominantly feel this year? Not the only emotion you want to feel, but on purpose, if you choose the emotion, what is that emotion going to look like? What are the thoughts that you want to have about yourself? What are the thoughts you want to have about your partner? What are the thoughts you want to have about your kids, your friendships, your family? What are those thoughts? What do you want to think about those things? Are you wanting to think thoughts that, I want to work on this relationship? And then be specific. Don't tell yourself, oh, I want to improve our intimacy or I want to improve our communication, but you actually haven't thought about what that actually looks like in real life because you just came up with the idea, new year, new me, I want to have a better relationship. But like, what does that mean to you, right? You can, for example, people say, I want to spend more time with my partner. And it's like, but what does that mean? Do you want to spend 1 hour a day together? Do you want to spend 5 hours a day together? What does that actually look like? Decide and define it, not so that you can meet that target every day, but just so you have an idea of what it looks like. Because otherwise, you're like climbing this mountain and you don't know where you're going. You're just like climbing, and you don't know what the destination is. So if you are like just considering what you want to have, one of the things I would offer you is just to look and see what is lacking in your relationship right now, and then decide what of those things that are lacking are the things that you want to focus on your marriage. And I will tell you that positive perspective of what that will look like will give you an idea of what you actually do want to feel and what you do want to think, right? Because if the predominant thought is that it creates a feeling of, defensiveness or criticism or contempt or stonewalling, right? Then those are not things that are going to propel you forward in your relationship. No matter if it's your marriage, your friendships, your parenting, whatever that is, focus on what you want to think and focus on the emotions that will create, and then create the habits, right? Have that intentional habit creation that is going to be the implementation intention that was going to get you to your goal. So thank you so much again for tuning in. I'm so excited to be back. The holiday break was amazing. And as always, you can email us, leave us a review of the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. We are close to 100 episodes. I still haven't decided what that's going to look like, but it's coming in 3 episodes, I guess. I've actually thought about interviewing my family. So having my husband, my siblings, and my daughter, and maybe my parents if they are up to it, and just doing a Ask Me Anything podcast. So yeah, I can't wait to share the 100th episode, and I'm so thankful for your support and for everybody that shares this episode with other people. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I wish you a great year. It's going to be epic. I know it. And as always, you know where to find me if you have any questions. Like I said, all the books that I reference will be in the show notes. If I missed one, please email me and I'll find it for you. All right, have a good one. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.